Necromancy is an ancient practice that has both fascinated and horrified humanity throughout history. It involves summoning the spirits of the dead and communicating with them to learn about the future and uncover hidden knowledge. It's what's thought of as black magic or death magic, the type that's dangerous, taboo, and should be avoided. But necromancy wasn't always viewed this way. In fact, it was so common in ancient times that you can find necromantic rituals in Homer's Odyssey. The word necromancy comes from the Greek words nekros and manteia, which literally means divination from the dead. The idea was that because the dead were in another realm, they had access to knowledge unknown to us, from the past, present, and future. Necromancy traditionally involves rituals, spells, incantations, symbols, and the invocation of spirits. These could be mundane or grotesque, depending on the purpose. Some practices involved wearing the clothes of the deceased or sitting for days without moving in places like a graveyard or the home of the dead person. Sometimes, it even involved mutilating and eating a corpse as a way to call the spirit. If the person had died a violent or premature death, it was thought that the corpse contained some amount of unused vitality. This is why the practice of using parts of corpses when creating charms became an important technique of some forms of witchcraft. The practitioners of necromancy were skilled magicians who would use a consecrated circle to protect themselves from the anger of the spirits. There are stories of necromancers who have used this form of magic to find lost treasures and learn powerful secrets. Some used it to seek power, knowledge, healing, and protection. Some turned to necromancy for personal reasons, such as to bring back a lost lover or to communicate with deceased relatives. In this way, necromancy was a thread in the fabric of many cultures, albeit a hidden and dark thread. The origins of necromancy go far back to ancient times. It was a fundamental part of the beliefs of ancient Greeks, Romans, Egyptians, and Babylonians. But in these cultures, it didn't carry the stigma that it carries today. Rather, it was a ritualistic practice intertwined with spirituality and religion. One of the earliest and most well-known examples we have of necromancy comes from Homer's Odyssey. In this account, the sorceress Circe tells Odysseus to perform a necromantic ritual, known as a Nikia, to summon the spirit of the dead prophet Tiresias, so he could provide him guidance on how to journey back home. Nikia was a common practice in ancient Greece, where a ghost would be summoned and questioned about the future. So, this account gives us an idea about the broader cultural and religious attitudes of the time towards death and the afterlife. Similarly, the Egyptians believed in the power of communicating with the dead. There are examples of divination by the dead that appear in the Demotic Papyri, a collection of ancient Egyptian magical texts. These provide instructions on how to call various types of dead spirits and also how to send them back. The priests and magicians of the time were well versed in rituals and spells that involved interacting with the spiritual realm. This was about maintaining balance, honoring the dead and learning from their wisdom. It wasn't so much about summoning spirits for control. However, Judaism and Christianity has always condemned necromancy and consulting with the dead. For example, the Book of Deuteronomy lists necromancy among the practices that are detestable to God. Let no one be found among you who is a medium or spiritist or who consults the dead. In chapter 28 of the first book of Samuel in the Bible, there is the story of the Witch of Endor, a figure who calls upon the spirit of the prophet Samuel at the request of King Saul. While the witch herself doesn't intend harm, Saul's consultation of her and the resulting prophecy lead to his downfall, showing how necromancy was seen as a dangerous art with potentially harmful consequences. By the Middle Ages, the Church intensified its crackdown on necromantic practices, increasingly associating them with witchcraft and black magic. This shift occurred partly because of a rise in superstition and religious beliefs, particularly within Christianity. There was a deep-seated belief in witchcraft, necromancy, and heraldry, and therefore a need to stifle these so-called dangerous practices. There was also a growing belief that communicating with the dead was an act of consorting with demonic forces, rather than spirits. The church began to categorize necromancy and other forms of magic as heretical and akin to devil worship. Interestingly, this was also when Goetic necromancy began to grow. This is a branch of necromancy that relates to summoning and controlling demons, as outlined in the grimoire, The Lesser Key of Solomon. Some of these demons, like Murmur and Bune, are said to have the power to bring deceased souls before the practitioner so that the practitioner could ask whatever question he wished. Goetic necromancy diverged from the traditional form, but it heavily draws from it. It wasn't devil worship, but it did involve demons and the dead. And so, necromancy, once seen as a means of divination or spiritual communication, became stigmatized as a dark and forbidden form of magic. In many places, necromancy was made illegal. As this viewer of our channel puts it, it was a dying art. But in reality, it continued in more secret forms and has seen a resurgence in modern times. While necromancy is no longer widely practiced as it was in ancient or medieval times and tends to hold negative connotations in magic as a forbidden dark art, there is still interest in this field. In certain occult communities, practices echoing traditional necromancy can still be found. These are aimed at communicating with the spiritual realm, although often in more symbolic contexts than as genuine attempts to communicate with the dead. You could also argue that modern mediums practice a form of necromancy, as their aim is to establish communication with the spiritual realm. While these practices are not typically classified as necromancy in a traditional sense, they do share the fundamental concept of contact with the deceased. But they operate within a different ethical and cultural framework, and tend to focus on personal spirituality and healing, rather than on the more arcane objectives historically associated with necromancy. There's something about necromancy that just captures the imagination, whether you're for it or against it. At its core, it touches on the profound mysteries of death and the afterlife, themes that have intrigued humanity throughout history. There are numerous examples of this forbidden practice in popular culture and media, from ancient to modern times. For example, Shakespeare often included aspects of necromancy in his works, including Hamlet and Macbeth. Other popular examples include Game of Thrones, where the Night King wields the power to raise the dead, and the Harry Potter series with its Resurrection Stone and the eerie inferi, who are zombie-like puppets. These stories captivate audiences by exploring the boundaries between life and death. This widespread representation of necromancy in media reflects a continued fascination with the idea of communing with the beyond, a concept both alluring and unsettling at the same time. It represents the human desire to understand life's mysteries, cope with the fear of death, and find comfort in the possibility of an afterlife. What do you think? Does necromancy have positive aspects, or is it a dark art to be avoided? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel. We have an entire playlist on occult topics, so why not check it out? Thanks for watching.